Redemption Signs. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. I've updated the event study calendar, expanded it just about 2 weeks, and that includes the extra data that we've been studying. Information that gives us a better idea of where we are right now, and this week is very important. A lot of prophetic events coming together and in the days ahead, and so the more information we can gather gives us a better clue of where we are right now. And when we take a look at it, a lot is going on, and we've definitely seen the enemy very busy. Someone commented that yesterday on the 13th, the city of Nimrud was liberated over in Iraq, and this city is definitely known for a lot of the symbolism that we've been seeing lately. And the article even takes the opportunity to talk about the tomb of Jonah and Nineveh and other artifacts, bringing to mind the Palmyra Arch too, but a lot of the symbolism that we've seen, and it's very interesting to see in this very important week that we're in right now, and in just a few days ahead too, with all the symbolism that the enemy is using in other references to Babylon, and a lot of the symbolism that came out of that and what it represents, especially with the Tower of Babel. We see a lot of this enemy activity going on. They are messaging their disciples that this is a very important time. And we've looked at the consistent, systematic messaging that they've been giving out and the displays that are going on right now. And they are constantly still reminding their disciples that the Tower of Babel work, the mystery of iniquity work, is still going on. And we've been looking at this, how it is a campaign that they are running. The enemy knows this time is very important because they know they're about to be unrestrained. And like we talked about in the last video, it all goes back to their understanding of the mystery of iniquity that even Jesus warned his disciples about. It was active even at that time. They were getting ready, even then, 2,000 years ago, getting ready for this day when they would be unrestrained and they would be able to re-energize their Tower of Babel effort. And they are still continuing to push this exact same message during these days because they know what time it is. And so it's very interesting to see that messaging of the city of Nimrud brought up this week, especially in context of the other displays that we've seen going on with the announcements of the end is near and the end of the beginning and all the other messaging. They know it's coming to a climax. They know the border is around here very soon. And they also know the sign of the woman is about to start too. And we're in the middle of the peace and safety days right now, the anniversary of that a year ago, which means sudden destruction is coming. They know that. And so we are at a very important prophetic time, and the enemy knows it, and they're continuing to put out the same messages to their disciples so that they will be ready. Now we're on the 14th and 15th, and just when we look at the display that they put up at the Colosseum called Rising from the Ashes, and that's going through December 11th. And it's just interesting how they bookend this time frame, and a lot of the other messaging that's happened in this time frame, bookend it with that very important messaging. And then right now where we are on the 14th and 15th, they've just put out another message reminder about the city of Nimrud. And we've also talked before about how they are going to be setting up the Arch of Palmyra, which relates to a lot of this phoenix concept and the palm coming back. They're going to be setting that up in late 2016, and there's not that much time left for that, and haven't heard word yet of when they're going to be setting that up. But it's interesting how they're bookending the time where we are right now, particularly before the pregnancy picture starts. And we're going to talk more about that later today. But that's just the Rising from the Ashes display. But then the other art display, the beginning of the end, that is at Times Square. It's interesting to see how that also bookends this week where we are right now. Of course, we can't say definitively that means anything, but it is interesting how they are pointing to that this time frame is very important. So there's a lot of information on this calendar. I would highly suggest you print it out and study it, and this gives us an idea of the time where we're at right now. There's multiple prophetic events going on right now, and so we've included that information. We do not know the day or hour of the rapture, but we can look at other prophetic events that are coming together right now that do include sudden destruction and the pregnancy picture, the sign of the Son of Man, and other things we were warned about that hedge in our understanding of when the rapture is expected to take place. And so this is what we are studying. And we are told to watch, we are told to look, we are told to research, we are told to be vigilant and to be expecting our Redeemer, and that there are certain things that we are told to look for and that we are supposed to be lifting up our heads when we see certain signs and see certain things coming together. We won't know the day or the hour, but we will see several things coming together that will definitely hem in our understanding of when we should expect. We should expect our redemption to take place, the rapture and the gathering of his people. And so right now, where we are right now, just this week and even the days ahead, there's really a threshold of multiple prophetic events that we're told to look for and that we know will happen, and what's going to happen with those events. We see them all coming together in this area. And so we must be very vigilant during this time. So definitely, again, download the event study calendar. This weekend on the 19th would be the earliest that Jupiter would be approximately entering Virgo and approximately starting the pregnancy pattern. And I say earliest because there are other options. We cannot concretely say the picture starts on that day. And one of the main reasons for this is that there's different configurations of Virgo, even in common usage today. And I mentioned this in our last video that we have to not go with the modern understanding of Virgo shape because it's so widely varied that we have to look at other variables that are stronger for determining certain timing. For example, a lot of the configurations that you see, particularly with prophetic talking about Revelation 12 sign and whatnot, they will use a Western view that's often found in Stellarium, but Stellarium also has a HA-ray version, and I've been using an altered version of that, just taking off the odd-shaped head and substituting it for what we're more familiar with. And so there's several different variations in common practice today, but it should also catch your attention that the standardized chart for Virgo, the International Astronomy Union, looks nothing like a lot of the other ones that you typically see. And so it comes back to the question of what are you using to determine your understanding of prophetic events. We have to be careful what we go by. And especially in cases like this where there's multiple variations, we can't say definitively, oh, the pregnancy pattern starts on this day because of it entering the constellation shape on a certain day. That gives us a good start to look for, but we should always look for more concrete evidence to specifically say, okay, here's something that shows more weight of our understanding for a particular matter. For example, when we do look at Virgo, we just zoom in on the side of it with one view of Virgo. On the 19th, this weekend, is when Jupiter is approximately going to be entering the main body of Virgo on this configuration. But if you go by the standardized, internationally recognized celestial chart, though, which supposedly should be the standard in this modern time, if you went by that, you would be waiting another month before Jupiter technically entered Virgo's body. And so it makes a huge difference which configuration of Virgo you're using. There's a whole month difference just between these two configurations. And so we have this data on the calendar just for reference to show you that there are two different approaches to it. But a month difference is pretty big. And it can change our perception of the pregnancy picture that is going on in Virgo too as well. And it is interesting to note that Jupiter at opposition is going to take place in Virgo. And so whenever we do research, we should always look for facts and we look for research that can back up why we are leaning toward a certain direction. It does not mean we are absolutely correct, but we should be able to affirm with evidence why we have a certain understanding. And this is what we try to do with our ministry, Informed Christians. We try to have something that can back up what we are looking at and why we are going forward, not just based on opinion. No, we should be able to demonstrate this is why we are looking at this particular time, and this is why we are not considering other things. So this is why I encourage you, print out our material, because it is the evidence of what we are affirming based on the best of our understanding of why we are looking and why we have a certain perspective of certain things. I want you to print it out so you can study it and to see there is a reason why we are looking in certain areas and at certain times. It does not guarantee that we are correct. It just shows that we do have a reason for why we are looking. And it's not something that we're just making up. And we've been trying to understand the border of Judah defined by the Babylonians. In our last video, we talked about a lot of research from the Encyclopedia Britannica and many other academic sources that showed this is the way they did it. We know this for sure. We can prove it. And we're not using our opinion here. But we also know that there are gaps in the understanding and that there are different approaches to using this information of the Station 1 versus opposition versus Station 2. But the more that I've been looking at the research, I'm leaning heavily toward that the interpretation is at opposition. And that is definitely one stated theory, but it appears very strong. For example, in just this resource here, they talk about when the planet was brilliantly opposite to the sun in the star sphere, the Babylonians gave it the special name Nibiru. And that's mentioned in the tablet too as well. But we can find multiple references strongly suggesting that it was at opposition. When Jupiter was at opposition, when it was shining the brightest, there's a lot of weight to consider that that was the station that actually defined the boundaries. We can't state 100%, but there is a lot that leans toward that direction that we found. It also happens to be the very next border option on the list, but the fact that there's a lot that strongly shows that we can consider this very strongly as a border, we continue to go forward with that right now and demonstratively able to show that there's academic reason for that assumption and that understanding. And so when we consider the options and we do research, that also gives us new directions to do further research. When we can look at where this falls, we can then look at, okay, if the border does start when Jupiter is at opposition and it ends at when Jupiter is at opposition, then that raises up some questions that causes us to do more research. Namely, when Jupiter was at opposition in Leo the Lion, did certain things happen there that might have been done as a celestial sign to catch our attention and draw emphasis to that time that we should have been paying attention that that time was very important? And Jupiter at opposition was a significant moment that we needed to at least remember and take note of. We should be asking these questions. And so I asked the question and I did some digging back into our research because we've been looking and watching this sign for a while. So I looked back on our calendar. And if you've been with us a while, you've seen our cyclical calendar of the past year from April 2015 through March 2016. And Jupiter was at opposition on March 8th, which is right at the top there, which instantly caught my attention because that was right near the total solar eclipse. And if you remember, last year on the Hebrew calendar, particularly the one that we're following, was very, very unique because the year started exactly with the total solar eclipse and it ended exactly with another total solar eclipse. So the fact that Jupiter was at opposition just a few hours prior to a repeat of a total solar eclipse right at the beginning of the year too as well was very significant. And this was definitely a large celestial sign happening at the same time that Jupiter was at opposition, when Jupiter was at its brightest. Even the sun was turned out for a moment. And so you have a multitude of extremely unique celestial signs all in that time frame drawing attention to it. And the more that I did some studying, just digging back through our old information and our old tracking of what was going on, it really brought my attention to how significant this day was, really, March 8th, when Jupiter was at its brightest. Because here you had multiple events coming together that were totally unique. You had a total solar eclipse, and at the same time, just separated by hours, Jupiter was at its brightest, shining bright. But not only that, but it was right next to Leo's hind paw, drawing attention to the Shiloh prophecy. And this time was actually when we first really noticed the Shiloh prophecy. If you remember, if you've been with us a while, we had been looking at the Fast of Esther and Purim and how the Star Bethlehem signs were pointing to that. And it's as we were almost on the threshold of Purim that we noticed Jupiter and the moon lining up together right at the exact same time with the full moon there too, and that definitely caught our attention. We noticed Jupiter and the moon, and then noticed that it was in context of Leo the Lion, and that Jupiter was the brightest at the pole, and it was at that time, right when Jupiter's at opposition, that God drew our attention to this Shiloh prophecy at this point. And so in reflection, this is extremely important to look back and see a sign in retrospect, but see it in a whole new way. And especially at that time, we definitely took notice of how Jupiter was at the brightest right between Purim and right between the triumphal entry and Passover, where Jupiter and the moon again got together right at that time too as well. And it was this incredible symmetry and choreography that caught our attention at the time that definitely woke us up to say, okay, something is going on. God is trying to draw our attention to this sign. Jupiter, the lion, Esther, the story of redemption, the tapestry of redemption, all of it was coming together. And this was definitely a watershed event when our eyes were open to the Shiloh prophecy at this time when Jupiter was at its brightest, when Jupiter was at opposition. And it's interesting to also consider that we did not even really consider Jupiter being in its retrograde motion. We weren't even paying attention to it up until that point when Jupiter was already halfway through its retrograde motion. We did not really pay attention to Jupiter until it was right at the middle, when it was right at opposition, right next to the hind paw, right next to the feet of the lion. And significantly, it was to the right of the hind paw, which means as a border, both the feet would be within the Judah section. But it definitely caught my attention, the symmetry of it all, the organization, the choreography. and also how the Lord brought our attention to it halfway through the retrograde. We didn't even notice it until then. But then we also noticed that the enemy was very busy at that same time too. We saw them do a lot of their emphasis with the gods of Egypt and Leo, and that was the big emphasis on the gold and silver Academy Award idols that they had at that time, and the big emphasis they were making on Dear Esther at that exact same time. And they nominated Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, that game, on the same day as the total solar eclipse, which is the logo in the game. And that was the time when they mentioned the Dear Esther, which had just preceded it as an event, and is right in between when the real fast of Esther happened in the next few days. The enemy knows exactly what time it is. They know the celestial clock, and all their messaging has been very precisely matching up with the celestial signs and pictures we've been looking at. They have a distorted message for their disciples, but we can tell and see that they know exactly what the celestial clock time is, what the proper time is, and also what the prophetic time is, and that the Shiloh prophecy is going on. And that they apparently know the importance of Jupiter at opposition in connection with the time frame, the expectation of the rapture, the gathering of Shiloh's people. But regardless of the enemy activity, we can tell just by looking at the choreography of the Tapestry of Redemption at this time and the celestial signs, 3 very unique celestial signs coming together at the same time, separated by mere hours. The total solar eclipse, Jupiter being at the brightest, and at the hind pole, and number 4, it's the beginning of the new year, which also signals the dawning of a new day on the yearly day pattern cycle. 4 significant things coming together right at this time that strongly leads us to believe that this truly is the border that would define Judah. But when we also looked at other events that preceded and led up to that, things we were studying, we definitely took notice of the celestial signs, the 5 planets being visible shortly before that. And in a way, that was very valuable to catching our attention to the celestial signs and having us start tracking them more so, and with more detail, taking note of what was going on. And we needed that in a sense before we got to that point at the total solar eclipse and at opposition, just getting in the habit of recording and taking notes on these things. But our attention was drawn to that time, especially drawn toward Purim, and then once we got there to the next step and more observations. And our readiness was also drummed up, so to speak, by the peace and safety warnings that we had heard not too long before that. And then there's also the sign of Jonah's sign, which you could argue brought us right up to opposition with the timing. You could argue that too as well. But we also took note that there was the redemption reminder on Shabbat Shlechem, which was a reminder that went out at that time shortly before the new year, reminding people that the atonement was due on the first of the year. And that was the half shekel. And we've talked about this before. The half shekel was given as a memorial of how God would atone and make ransom for them. Exodus 30, 11 through 16. We don't have time to read the whole passage here, but the emphasis is that every man would give a ransom for his soul unto the Lord. Verse 15, to make an atonement for their souls. Verse 16, thou shalt take the atonement money of the children of Israel, and shall appoint it for the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, that it may be a memorial unto the children of Israel before the Lord, to make an atonement for your souls. The half shekel was a memorial that God was going to make atonement for them, and that one day he would provide himself a lamb, and he would pay the ultimate atonement. And we're reminded in 1 Timothy 2:3, for this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who will have all men to be saved and to come unto the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God, and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time. Jesus Christ, he was our ransom. He was our half shekel, the picture there. He was our atonement. And remember, when he came as the lamb and he died at the time of Passover, he also fulfilled the day of atonement. Jesus Christ, he gave himself a ransom for all, to pay the atonement, to pay the ransom. He paid the price that we could not pay. And what are we reminded of? Luke 21:28. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up, and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. When all these prophetic events start coming together, when you see them beginning to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, and you will see a sign connected to your redemption, connected to your atonement, connected to your ransom. You will see the day of your redemption, your pickup, drawing nigh. You will see a sign. You will be able to look up. You will be able to lift up your heads. You'll be able to see a sign connected to your redemption and your Redeemer, that your redemption, your pickup, is drawing nigh. When we look back with a new perspective on the signs that we have already seen, we see it in a whole new light. The reminder that the half shekel was going to be collected went out several weeks before the first of the new year. The atonement was due on the first of the new year. And it's interesting to note that Jupiter was at opposition a day before the new year started. We have Jupiter at its brightest right on the same day as a total solar eclipse, just hours before the beginning of the new year, reminding us that our redemption is drawing nigh. The reminder that our redemption has already been paid. That is what the sign signaled on that day, the sign of our redemption, and that our day of redemption is drawing nigh. And so with this background, when we look at the importance of Jupiter at opposition at that time of what we have already seen, what we've already looked up and seen, we can tell that our redemption is drawing nigh. And that gives further weight to the understanding that this division halfway through the retrograde with Jupiter at opposition does strongly appear to be it. This does not tell us the day of the rapture. This only tells us the border and the time frame of the Shiloh prophecy. The ending of this time frame would be approximately December 8th. So let's look at some more details. When we look at Virgo with the indented version, we get an idea of where we are right now, November 14th. We are not inside the body of the woman yet, and the retrograde loop hasn't started yet either. Now remember that the Chaldean stars for the woman were Spica and Porrima. We know those for sure. There were others involved, but these are the two we know for sure. And so we don't know the stars in between that, so there is some guesswork there. But just going by the modern depiction of it, the main body would be there. But there are the other variations that have a straight line between Porrima and Spica too as well. And so we do consider that because they are on the table. And of course we're on November 14th right now. And Jupiter is going to be moving leftward, eastward, and it's going to enter into the loop. And it's going to reach Station 1 on February 6, 2017. And that would be Station 1, when it visually appears to slow down and stop for a while. And that's just its apparent motion. It appears to stop for about a week. And that would mark a border at the onset, the beginning of the retrograde motion, because retrograde is when it's going the retro, the opposite way. Normally when it's going eastward, that's called prograde motion. So Station 1 would mark a border at the onset of retrograde. But then next, Jupiter will be going along, and by April 7th, it will be at opposition, opposite the sun. And that is when it will be brightest too as well. That's when it's going to be at opposition. So then that would mark the station of Nibiru, what has strong academic evidence for that, and then also the celestial signs from a biblical perspective that seem to heavily push toward that too as well. So the border would be there approximately along the ecliptic. And Jupiter will be reaching that equivalent position around December 8th and 9th of 2016. So not that far in the future will it be reaching that equivalent location along the ecliptic. But then as Jupiter continues in its retrograde, it will eventually slow down and pause again visually at Station 2. And that's what we looked at a couple days ago. And that is another station that could be a border. And that's the first one we looked at. And that's the first one we came to. And now we're a few days past that. And then it will progress all the way on its way, all the way to September 23rd, 2017. That's where it will be after it has gone through the pregnancy cycle within the retrograde time. So it's also significant to notice that approximately at the opposition border is actually when Jupiter will be entering into the loop portion of it. Now, because of the variations in Virgo shape, it's hard to definitively state when it enters Virgo just by that, because there's so many configurations. You'll have people arguing which one is the one. So this is why in the last video I emphasized we have to have a biblical perspective. What else is there that hems in our understanding of when the pregnancy cycle would start? Because even just with the different configurations of Virgo, you can see the retrograde goes just slightly outside of the body, even on the straight line too as well. So there are going to be other variables that help us understand exactly when the pregnancy cycle starts. And this is why I highly suggest going by the reference of Hanukkah. on the biblical calendar that we've been following, because the Bible shows us that Christ was conceived during the time of Hanukkah. And especially since this whole sign, up until the Revelation 12 sign, is rehearsing the birth of the Son of Man, that's what it's rehearsing, that picture, we can rest solidly on the biblical pattern that has been given for us, that the conception would start around the time of Hanukkah. And going by a reference from December 3rd to the time of September 23rd, that would mark a 42-week pregnancy, which is not uncommon. That would be a very normal pregnancy. And so not only is it a normal pregnancy, and hence a normal pregnancy picture, but we also have a biblical backing of that's when the conception actually started too as well. So we can very strongly point to December 3rd as that is when the pregnancy picture would start, regardless of the boundaries of Virgo. We can point to December 3rd as very strong, as the conception would be happening right around that time period. And then a few days after that, December 16th, that would just be a date. That's when it would actually cross the international chart line on the 16th. And December 17th would mark the appropriate time for a 40-week pregnancy. And I'm just putting these out there just for your reference and your information. And we've also mentioned before that a 40-week pregnancy, most pregnancies go beyond 40 weeks. So most pregnancies aren't limited to 40 weeks. And so you just have to keep all this in mind when you look at the picture that's being rehearsed. I would strongly lean toward December 3rd, as that is when the technical pregnancy picture would actually start. And we could see the border for Judah would be shortly after that anyways. So we would expect the rapture to be taking place sometime even before the pregnancy picture started, because that is the next sign, and that's a sign that Jesus told his disciples about. So we study all this, and I have put this together in a printable form. You can download it in our Google Drive. There is a link in the description box. So download that if you want to study it. Just see all the events that are taking place in the days, months, and year ahead. And then, of course, definitely download the calendar and compare it. Right now, we're on the 14th and 15th. The 19th, arguable when Jupiter will approximately be entering Virgo. But then next week, the 26th, really the 25th, that's when Hanukkah starts. And one can make the argument very easily that the pregnancy cycle is starting then too as well. So a lot coming together, and all this information hedges in our understanding. It hems it in of where we are right now, and helps us understand the time we are at right now. We are on a threshold between two prophetic pictures. And you could see I marked on December 8th of when Jupiter would be reaching that opposition mark, really the 8th and 9th, the end of the 8th. And so that also gives you an idea of where the border based on the opposition would be too as well. So definitely download these and study them. It is an incredible picture coming together, and it is amazing to see what the Lord shows us as we continue to go forward in faith. When we continue to seek Him for wisdom, He gives wisdom. When we hunger and thirst after the things of righteousness, He will show us the treasures in His Word and new insights on what He has already shown us too as well. And this is very important to the concept of watching. We are not looking for dates. We are looking for what God is showing us. And we take notes about it, and we study what God is showing us. Because sometimes the things that God shows us won't come into effect right away. He wants us to take note of them, but sometimes God shows us things that won't come into play or come into our remembrance again till much later. And that is what we're seeing here. And it has caught my attention how the Lord has brought us back to this time, to things that He has already shown us that relate to the Shiloh prophecy, but then giving us new insight to how that further gives us an understanding of the Shiloh prophecy and what we are supposed to be lifting up our heads and looking for, the sign of our redemption. It was pointed to way back when in March, and we're given new insight to the importance of what God showed us at that time and how it applies to where we are now. And I was reminded of the wise men in Matthew 2:9. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. The word exceeding there has the idea of violent. These professional astronomers, probably older in years, they got really excited. They're hooping and hollering and screaming when they saw the sign of the promised Messiah, the promised Redeemer, the promised one who would make atonement, the one they had risen up to go out to see. They had gone out to see the Messiah. And they were excited when they saw the same star that they saw before. They now saw the same star a second time. And in a way, this is what has happened for us. We saw the events before, and God is now drawing our attention full circle back to what we saw before. The same star we saw back in our past, in our east, so to speak, God is drawing our attention to it and pointing it to us again. And we are excited when we see the connections and how it reaffirms the direction we are going. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. To learn more about this story of redemption and the redeemed possession, check out our video, Exodus 2, the redeemed possession. The link is in the description box. We are called to be sober. We are called to be vigilant. We are called to be ready. We have heard the lion roar. We have seen the signs that he has pointed out to us to draw our attention, that our redemption is drawing nigh. We have heard the cry at midnight, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. So let us rise up, let us trim our lamps, and let us go out to meet him halfway, our beloved, our bridegroom, our Redeemer. And while we go out to meet him, let us make ourselves ready, and let us serve him first and highest above all else. Maranatha.